You are Eleanora Whitfield, 73 years old. And the last thing you remember clearly from that Tuesday morning is the smell of your son's cologne as he hugged you goodbye in the parking lot of Willowmere Senior Living. He said it would only be temporary. He said the doctors just wanted to monitor you. He said he loved you. Then he got into his car and you watched the taillights disappear down the road. And somewhere deep in your chest, a door quietly closed. That was 14 months ago. Nobody has called since. You sit by the window of room 214 most afternoons, watching the maple tree outside shed its leaves and grow them back, marking time the only way that still feels honest. The nurses here are kind enough, though overworked. Your roommate, a soft-spoken woman named Marguerite Ashcombe, plays gin rummy with you on Thursdays and never asks about your family, because she's learned, as you have, that some silences are kinder than the truth. You raised 2 children alone after your husband, Desmond, passed when they were still in grade school. You worked triple shifts at a textile plant in Ohio, then later ran a small bookkeeping business out of your kitchen table so you could be home when they got off the bus. Your son Prescott became a real estate developer. Your daughter Odalis became a marketing executive in Chicago. You were proud of them in the quiet way mothers are proud, never boasting, just holding it close like a warm stone in your pocket. You gave them everything you had. And when your health took a small stumble, a fall in your bathroom, nothing broken, just bruised, Prescott and Odalis sat you down at your own kitchen table and told you it would be safer for you to move somewhere with more support. You believed them. You wanted to believe them. You signed papers you didn't fully read because your son slid them across the table with the same steady hand he used when he negotiated million-dollar property deals. And you trusted that hand because it belonged to your boy. You didn't know that the papers gave him power of attorney over more than your medical decisions. The first few months, you told yourself they were simply busy. Prescott had 2 children in private school and a business expanding into 3 new states. Odalis was chasing a promotion, flying to New York twice a month. You understood busy. You had been busy once too, in a life that used to be yours. But months became a year, and the phone never rang. Birthdays passed unmarked. Christmas came and went. And Marguerite's family visited with pies and grandchildren in reindeer sweaters. And you sat 2 feet away in a chair by the door, wearing a cardigan Odalis had given you 7 years ago, watching someone else's joy fill the room like sunlight you weren't standing in. You wrote letters. You called. Sometimes Prescott answered, always rushed, always distracted by some meeting he was walking into. Odalis rarely answered at all, and when she did, her voice had the careful, clipped patience of someone speaking to an inconvenience rather than a mother. The staff noticed. Nurse Odalis, no, wait. You catch yourself, that's not right. The nurse's name was Fenimore, young Bridget Fenimore, who used to bring you extra pudding cups on hard days and once sat with you for an hour when you cried after a phone call that went to voicemail. Bridget was the one who finally said gently, "Miss Eleanora, have you thought about talking to someone, a lawyer maybe, just to understand where things stand?" You almost laughed. What did an old woman in a nursing home need with a lawyer? You had nothing left to protect, or so you thought. But Bridget mentioned a name, a small firm 2 towns over, run by a man named Barnaby Holloway, who specialized, she said, in elder financial matters. It doesn't cost anything to ask, she told you. Sometimes just asking is the bravest thing you can do. So you asked. You remember the day Barnaby Holloway walked into Willomere's visiting room, tall and unhurried, carrying a leather folder and an expression of quiet, deliberate calm, the kind of calm that comes from a man who has seen families do terrible things to each other and has learned not to be shocked, only thorough. He sat across from you, folded his hands and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, before we talk about anything else, I want you to tell me your story. All of it. Take your time." And you did. You told him about Desmond, about the textile plant, about raising 2 children on grit and prayer. You told him about the papers on the kitchen table, about the silence that followed, about the pudding cups and Marguerite's rummy hands and the maple tree outside your window that had lost its leaves twice since you'd arrived. Barnaby listened without interrupting, and when you finished, he asked one simple question that would change everything. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you know what happened to the house you and your husband owned on Larkspur Lane?" You blinked. Prescott said he was helping me manage it, renting it out for extra income, since I'm here. Barnaby's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Whitfield, that house was sold 4 months ago for $410,000. The room seemed to tilt. I never signed anything to sell it, you whispered. No, Barnaby said quietly. You didn't. Your son used the power of attorney documents. You signed to transfer ownership and then to sell it. Without your knowledge, without your consent to the sale itself. That's not just a family disagreement. Mrs. Whitfield, that's a serious legal violation. You sat very still, your hands folded in your lap the way your own mother taught you to sit in church. And something inside you that had been quiet for 14 months finally began to stir. There's more, Barnaby said, and he opened the folder. Your husband's life insurance policy, the one naming you as sole beneficiary, was quietly redirected 6 years ago. Your son had you sign what he told you was a beneficiary confirmation form. During a visit, it was actually a change of beneficiary form. Prescott has been the sole beneficiary since. Your daughter has known about both of these things for at least 2 years. She has said nothing. You thought of every unanswered phone call, every unmarked birthday, every time you told yourself they were simply busy, simply tired, simply human. You had built excuses for them, the way you once built blanket forts for them as children. Soft, warm, protective structures made entirely out of love and entirely without walls. What do we do? You asked Barnaby, and your voice did not shake, which surprised you. He smiled just slightly. We do exactly what should have been done 14 months ago. We remind them who you are. Over the following weeks, Barnaby built the case with the precision of a man restoring something broken rather than merely litigating it. Financial records, signature analysis. A forensic accountant named Thaddeus Merriweather, who specialized in elder exploitation cases, who sat with you for hours, kind and unhurried, walking you through documents you didn't remember signing, and some you never signed at all. Through it, you kept living your quiet life at Willowmere. Thursdays with Marguerite, afternoons by the maple tree which had begun, slowly, to bud again. Bridget still brought you pudding cups, though now sometimes she'd catch your eye and give a small, knowing smile, as if she could sense the storm quietly gathering behind your calm exterior. Then the day came. Barnaby called Prescott and Odalis directly, requesting a formal meeting regarding matters concerning their mother's estate and financial affairs. He did not tell them what he knew. He simply requested their presence in person at his office in 1 week's time. You remember dressing carefully that morning, not out of vanity, but out of respect for yourself, something you had not extended to yourself in a long time. Bridget helped curl your hair. Marguerite lent you a brooch that had belonged to her late mother, pinning it to your collar with hands that trembled slightly, from age but steadied entirely with purpose. Go remind them, Eleanora, she said. Go remind them who raised them. Prescott arrived first, in an expensive coat, glancing at his watch. Odalis arrived 7 minutes later, sunglasses still on indoors, phone in hand. Neither of them, at first, noticed you sitting quietly in the corner of Barnaby's office, in a soft blue cardigan, hands folded, until Barnaby gestured toward you and said simply, I believe you both know your mother. The silence that followed was its own kind of confession. Mom, Prescott started, and for a moment his composed real estate developer voice cracked into something smaller, something that sounded almost like the boy who used to crawl into your bed during thunderstorms. What is this? This, Barnaby said, sliding a folder across the table, is a full accounting of the unauthorized sale of the property at Larkspur Lane, the fraudulent redirection of a life insurance beneficiary designation, and 14 months of what our office is prepared to formally document as elder abandonment and financial exploitation. Odalis's sunglasses came off. Her face had gone the color of old paper. We were going to tell her, she said quickly, about the house. We were going to... 14 months. Odalis, you said, and your voice, when it finally came, was not loud, but it filled the room the way your voice used to fill the kitchen when you called them down for supper. Steady, certain, unmistakably a mother's voice. 14 months of unanswered calls. Unmarked birthdays. A Christmas I spent watching Marguerite's grandchildren. Unwrapped presents because you two couldn't find one afternoon for me. And in that time, you sold your father's house. You took his insurance money. You did all of it while I sat in a room, waiting to hear from either of you, telling myself you were simply busy. Prescott's composure finally broke entirely. Mom, the business was struggling. The expansion, it needed capital, and I thought, You thought I wouldn't notice, you finished for him. Because I was old. Because I was inconvenient. Because it was easier to place me somewhere and forget me than to face me and explain. Barnaby, ever measured, spoke next. Mrs. Whitfield is prepared to pursue full legal recovery of both the property proceeds and the insurance funds, along with damages. She is also prepared, depending on today's conversation, to consider alternative resolutions. And here is the part you did not expect even from yourself. You did not want to destroy your children. You wanted more than the money, more than the vindication, for them to finally see you, not as an obligation to be managed, but as the woman who had built the very foundation they now stood on. I don't want to bankrupt you, you said quietly, watching both of them flinch, perhaps expecting the opposite. I want the house money returned, in full, to an account in my name alone. I want the insurance beneficiary corrected immediately through legal filing. And I want, you paused, feeling the weight of 14 months rise in your throat. I want you both to visit me, not out of guilt, not out of legal obligation, but because somewhere, in each of you is still the child who used to run to me when they were frightened. And I would like to meet that child again, if they still exists. The room was silent except for the soft sound of Odalys beginning, quietly to cry. Not the practiced tears of someone caught, but something that sounded old and real. Something that had perhaps been building for 14 months as well, buried under promotions and flights and the particular exhaustion of people who have convinced themselves that love can wait. Prescott sat down slowly, as if his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him up. I don't know how to fix 14 months, Mom. You start, you said, the same way you start anything worth fixing. One Thursday at a time. The legal proceedings moved forward exactly as Barnaby outlined. The Larkspur Lane proceeds were returned in full within 6 weeks, placed into an account bearing only your name. The insurance beneficiary designation was corrected through formal filing, restoring what had always rightfully been yours. Thaddeus? Merriweather's forensic report was thorough enough that no further disputes emerged. But the more remarkable change happened on Thursdays. Prescott began visiting every week, sitting across from you and Marguerite during rummy, learning, clumsily, at first, how to lose gracefully, to two women who had decades of practice, sharpening their card skills against long afternoons and longer silences. Odalys flew in once a month, then twice, bringing photographs of her own daughter. Your granddaughter, a bright-eyed girl named Wilhelmina you had seen perhaps 4 times in her whole life. Wilhelmina began sending you drawings, taped crookedly to the wall beside your window, each one slightly less crooked than the last. You moved out of Willowmere eventually, not because the staff had been unkind, but because Prescott insisted, this time with actions rather than papers slid quietly across a kitchen table, that you deserved to live in a home of your own again, one he helped you choose together, one where the maple tree outside was replaced by a small garden you tend yourself, hands in soil, something Desmond used to love and you had almost forgotten you loved too. Bridget still visits sometimes off the clock, bringing pudding cups out of habit more than necessity now. Marguerite calls every Sunday. And Barnaby Holloway, who you once thought you had no need for, sends you a card every year on the anniversary of the day he walked into that visiting room and asked you to tell him your story. You think often about that. Tuesday morning, 14 months, into your absence from your own life. The parking lot, the cologne, the taillights disappearing down the road. You do not regret that morning anymore. You understand now that it was not the end of your story, but the quiet, painful beginning of the part where you finally, fully became the author of it again. Because you are Eleanora Whitfield. You raised 2 children alone, on grit and prayer and triple shifts at a textile plant. You built a life out of nothing. Twice, once for your children, and once, much later, for yourself. And no signature slid across a kitchen table. No silence stretched across 14 months. No locked door in a nursing home hallway could ever truly take that from you. Some mothers wait quietly to be remembered. You reminded them yourself.